Jim Abbott's story transcends baseball, and sports in general for that matter. It's a story of a human being overcoming major adversity. Despite being born with only one hand, Jim wanted to play baseball just like every other kid growing up in the 70s, and he did so to the highest level of amateur baseball and eventually the major leagues. Because of that, it's also one of those stories that even non-baseball fans tend to be fairly familiar with, especially his 1993 no-hitter with the Yankees, and rightly so, but as with any good baseball story, you can dive as deep as you want to, like how Jim Abbott wasn't even the first major league player with this type of handicap. Pete Gray, a natural right-hander who had lost the majority of his right arm in a wagon accident at the age of 8, suited up as a wartime addition to the St. Louis Browns in 1945, after being named the Southern Association Player of the Year for the Memphis Chickasaws in 1944. This move saw Gray bypass 2 levels of professional baseball. He was one of several interesting players who joined big league rosters in the stead of a bunch of minor leaguers and even some marquee major leaguers, most notably Ted Williams, who were serving in World War II. Gray's presence resulted in an uptick in ticket sales for the Browns, and Pete gladly did charity work in support of troops coming home as amputees. Pete Gray played in the outfield, and as we'd see in Jim Abbott 50 years later, Pete was also a master of transferring his glove across his body. Understandably though, Pete struggled at the plate, ultimately batting .218 in 243 at-bats. Most single-A hitters would probably hang out around the Mendoza line at best, if promoted straight to the show today, in my opinion at least. His struggles at the plate were a source of frustration for his teammates though, who were trying to repeat as AL pennant winners. This would ultimately be the last winning season for the Browns before they packed their bags and moved to Baltimore 9 years later. Pete Gray hung around the minors for a couple more years and made barnstorming appearances into the 1950s before a quiet retirement in the Pennsylvania mountains. A 1986 television movie was made about his life called A Winner Never Quits, starring Keith Carradine. It's a pretty cool watch. Jim Abbott was born in Flint, Michigan to parents Mike and Kathy Abbott on September 19, 1967. They were supportive of him playing sports, but despite encouraging him to play soccer at a young age, Jim always gravitated towards baseball. Ironically, it was Jim's brother Chad who would become the soccer player in the family. Shades of days to come, Jim Abbott threw a no-hitter in his first Little League game. While he was home, he would spend hours working on the fielding aspect of his game, simulating comebackers by bouncing a rubber ball off the wall and refining his ability to do with one hand what most players would do with two. Little League was one thing, but Jim's high school coaches were skeptical he could field his position at that level. He proved them so wrong that he actually played first base when he wasn't pitching. His hitting was exceptional. He batted .427 his senior year with 7 home runs. Also worth mentioning the .76 ERA. He was drafted by the Blue Jays in the 36th round that year, but he opted to play at the University of Michigan instead. True to the pattern, all involved were nervous about Jim adapting to Division I college baseball, but he'd end up posting a 6-2 record his freshman year. His sophomore year, he stepped into a leadership role for the Wolverines and pitched a shutout in the NCAA tournament. His record that season was 11-3. He earned a spot on the U.S. national team and pitched a gem against Cuba in a warm-up game before the team departed for the Pan American Games, where he turned in more solid outings and Team USA won the silver medal. He was the recipient of that year's Golden Spikes Award, beating out some guys you may have heard of, Robin Ventura and Ken Griffey Jr. 1988 was another big year at Michigan, where Jim Abbott would be named Conference Player of the Year and pitch in the Olympics with a 5-3 complete game victory over Japan. With such a solid resume, Abbott made the decision to enter the MLB draft in lieu of his senior season. The Angels took Abbott 8th overall with a $207,000 signing bonus. The media buzz around spring training was unlike anything the franchise had ever seen. Another phase of speculation on whether or not Abbott could perform at the new heights. Well, Jim Abbott posted a fantastic fielding percentage that spring. Tony Gwynn struck out just once in all of spring training that year. Jim Abbott was the one who sat him down. Aided by a couple of injuries in the Angels' projected rotation, Abbott became the 15th player in history to completely skip the minor leagues. Pete Incaviglia had done so 3 years prior. Jim Abbott would debut against the Mariners on April 8, 1989. Baseball America ranked his debut second only to Jackie Robinson's debut with the Dodgers that broke the color barrier in terms of significance. He turned in 5 innings in a losing effort, but still received a standing ovation from a packed house at Angel Stadium. At the conclusion of this season, Jim Abbott posted a 12-12 record, but it was good for the most wins by a rookie starting pitcher in nearly 100 years. The next few seasons, Abbott had his ups and downs with the Angels, with the highlight being a third-place finish in 1991 AL Cy Young voting as Roger Clemens earned his third straight. The 1992 season was a letdown. The Angels only won 72 games. Abbott's 2.77 ERA suggested poor run support was the culprit for his 7-15 record. He would become that year's recipient of the Tony Conigliaro Award, given to a player who overcomes adversity. Speaking of Tony, he's featured in my video on the history of the batting helmet. You should check that out. That offseason, Abbott was dealt to the Yankees for 3 prospects. He got off on the wrong foot in the Bronx contract-wise, spending the winter in arbitration. He also had some inconsistent performances on the mound, which didn't sit well with baseball's notably most patient and understanding fan base. It was speculated that since Abbott couldn't hide his grip in the glove, he tipped his pitches more than most pitchers of his era. His ability to hold runners was also somewhat hindered. On May 24, 1993, Jim Abbott carried a no-hitter through 7 1/3 before Bo Jackson fisted a single and broke it up. He saluted Abbott upon reaching first base. That September, Jim Abbott chased history again. Anyone who's watched this no-hitter knows it doesn't start how you'd expect. Ball 1 to Kenny Lofton is spiked into the opposite batter's box. Then he walks him. In the second inning, Abbott walked veteran Randy Milligan before facing rookie Manny Ramirez, who had doubled once and homered twice the night prior in his homecoming to the Bronx, but he neutralized the hot bat for a routine fly ball. Little resistance for Abbott in the top of the third. In the bottom of 3, the camera pans to 2 dudes asleep in the nosebleeds. I'd love to know the story on that. Then, Deion James hits this wild Little League home run that scores Mike Gallego, Wade Boggs, and himself on 2 errors. In the fourth, we saw a nice play from old Randy to initiate the 6-4-3 double play. He pads the lead with a solo homer in the bottom of the inning. More good Yankees defense in the 5th. To conclude the top of the 6th, the Chicken Man gives him a greasy slap on the ass, and this is the first time we hear the broadcasters even mention that he's held the Indians' potent lineup hitless in a barrage of ironic banter about how ineffective Abbott has been that season. Not that they're wrong, but they definitely seem to have forgotten the caliber of player that Jim Abbott was. Wade Boggs reemerges in the 7th with this great diving play to put out Albert Belle for out number 20. Just 7 to go. Sup, Frank? In the 8th, Abbott gets Manny on a breaking pitch that dies in the dirt, and the backswing catches Nokes on the shoulder. Man, that looks like it hurts. Abbott walks Jim Thome, but manages to get out unscathed. And here we go, top of the 9th. Kenny Lofton up. He bunts foul and gets booed for it pretty hard. Where do you guys stand on bunting in a situation like this? Hot topic, let me know in the comments. He eventually grounds out. Bernie Williams tracks down a fly ball for out number 2. And here we go. Carlos Baerga strides in. Carlos would end up batting .321 that season, no slouch, but they get it.
Short for Marty. He did it. He did it. No hitter for Jim Abbott. Jim Abbott throws a no hitter and shuts out the Cleveland Indians 4-0. Mobbed by his teammates.
Abbott would suit up for the White Sox in 1995 before returning to the Angels for 96. He spent a year out of baseball, then made a comeback with the White Sox again, working his way through the minor league system for the first time as a 30-year-old, and earning a late season call-up where he'd win all 5 of his starts. The White Sox did not sign him for the 99 season, but the Brewers did, providing Jim with his first opportunity to show off his bat in the National League, notching the first base hit by a one-handed player since our old pal Pete Gray. He retired following this season, but has been present in sports and as a motivational speaker. Jim served as a mentor for Chad Bentz, the third Major League player with only one hand, also a pitcher. He appeared for the Expos in 2004 and the Marlins in 2005. Jim was also outspoken as the biggest fan of Shaq Griffin as he was entering the NFL draft. Abbott estimates that he averaged visiting one child with a disability per road series throughout his baseball career. He uses his story as a platform to provide charity work across the country. Abbott says sports were a way for him to find acceptance from his peers. He pays the same acceptance forward to the next generation.